checking out to see how good the settings are. Oh, okay. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't fucking see the screen very well. But, oh, okay. I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do next. I really want to get my Slayer up, but I had an idea, because Slayer's been really slow to train. It's been very tedious to train. And I kind of just want to, like, get access to the Abyssal Whip already. So I had a thought. It's kind of a stupid thought. There's an item in this game you can make called Wild Pies. And Wild Pies increase your Slayer by 5 levels. My thought was, for Slayer, Abyssal Demon is at 85. What if I just get to 80 and constantly boost with Wild Pies, killing Abyssal Demons until I get the thing. The only problem is I need to get my cooking up to 85, and I don't know of what the best way to train your cooking is. I'm trying to look at what the best way to train your cooking is.
She is beside herself. She is out of
Trying to look at XP per hour.
She is out of
Oh, that's a lot of loss. You can make like big botanical pies. Be sure you get a lot of XP per hour, but it's really expensive. Jug of wine.
She is losing herself.
It's pretty cheap to do. Pretty cheap to do jugs of wine, but the time spent is very little. I mean, because it's like, how much XP do I need to get from here to... Where's my cooking? Here to 85 cooking. Actually, we can go even deeper. Is there a cookie first? Because once I can get the wild pie, I have no reason to... Yeah, there is. There's Chef's Delight, which is 2 to 6. Who's cooking by... Oh, level divided times 1 over 20 plus 2. So if I have, so if I, like, let's say 85 minus, well, let's just look, maybe it just shows the table. Okay, there we go. So I basically have to get level 80 cooking. If I got level 80 cooking, so 80 cooking requires 1 million XP basically from where I currently am, which means 2 hours of doing, like, wines, essentially. And then I can boost to 86 using a Chef's Delight. Where the fuck am I gonna get some of these? Oh, I gotta get barley. Can I steal them? No, I have to grow them. I could probably steal barley, right? Barley seeds. Grow some barley. How long does it take to grow? Okay, we can start growing this, and then we can make ourselves one of these ales, which requires barley malt, and then chocolate dust and ale and yeast. What the fuck is ale and yeast stuff? Wow, it's such a great name for fermenting bacteria. purchase. So you can purchase it. That's easy. So I can purchase barley ale yeast. Okay, that's easy. So it's the barley that will take some time to get, and then once I get the barley, I can then do that. So I have to get to 80 cooking. I get my Slayer up one more level, and I can basically get the Abyssal Whip faster. Then the other option, I don't think though, once I do that, like the Kraken will take way too long to kill. I mean, I need a couple levels. I can't just have 82 in boost, because the Kraken will take longer than a minute to kill each attempt, right? So, if that's the case, like, yeah, if the Kraken's gonna take longer than 1 minute to kill each time, it's not gonna be worthwhile to me to... If the Kraken's gonna take longer than 1 minute to kill each time, it's not gonna be worthwhile. I have to get a couple of those pies. And then even then it might be like a tedious ass process, because like how long does it take to get to the Kraken? Like how long is the run to the Kraken? So if I go here, this is Kraken Cove. This is the Kraken boss. It's not too bad. Teleport here. There's Terry's teleport. That's far. I think I just go to AKQ from Slayer Ring to Front Slayer King and then run here for Kraken's Passage. Run here, Kraken Boss. Yeah, go fight the Kraken. Okay, that's not too bad. It's just a funny method, is all I'm thinking. Like a really funny method. Because just getting 85 Slayers is going to take a long time. The other option is I get 87 Slayer, which will take who knows how long. A couple, 27 hours still. So, I'm kind of, we'll see how I feel. I might get to like 82 Slayer or some shit like that, just the boosts last longer. I'm not having to constantly do stuff like that, but constantly, like, whatever, go for... I constantly eat my pies and have a lot of them, but that's just my thought, so... I think I have just... shit. Actually, I want to look up one other thing. How do I make a Ring of Wealth? Yeah, the other reason is because I don't really have a good way to kill the Kraken and not using Ivan's Blast, so. It's gonna take a long time to get the Trident, is my thought. So, what's the drop rate of the? How much does it take to kill? One in 512. It will take a while to get. It'll take a while to get still. So I think it's gonna be better to just. Yeah, I don't know. I probably should just level up my Slayer and stop being lazy about it, but still. There was just a thought entered my head, is all. Oh, how do I make a Ring of Wealth? That's what I was looking at. I gotta do the Dragonstone enchant, which is the Dragonstone enchant. It's pretty easy. I can do this right now, actually. I think I literally just have a Dragonstone ring somewhere. There we go. Simple. Now we have a Ring of Wealth. Which we'll wear while we're fighting these guys. We need that. We need some food. making a lot of pages, so we should just use those. And then we should use, what else do we need? We need our Ash Sanctifier, which should be in our Slayer tab. And then we need, food that we have here. Oh, and we need 2 potions. And we need a Slayer ring as well, so. Jesus, man, we're just too much stuff today. Excuse me. I think the Ring of Wealth increases the chance that you get a I think it also increases the rate at which you get blue scrolls. If I'm not mistaken. Wrong? Okay, yeah, 1 in 64. Is this the wilderness ones? Wait a second. Oh. Never mind, it literally does nothing. If you have it imbued and it's worn while you fight in the wilderness, then you have a higher chance. But unless it's imbued, then it does nothing. Okay, well I had no idea. We'll just still wear it, why not? I almost choked and died for a second. I had like no moisture in my throat whatsoever, and I just ate some peanut butter and jelly, and it just got stuck in my throat so bad. The spot seems kind of good. It seems like I'm always going to get Canada, no matter where we're at. Spot's good. Yeah, they're silly. Pretty nice. Hey. Yeah, goal is to get our Slayer up. Doing this. Trying to get our attack up right now just so we can start working on our defense, even put our defense up higher for Gauntlet and stuff like that. Ah! Don't do that. I'm shocked this guy still gets hit. Like literally his ass is inside the cannon. Fire Giants are back. Music is not at all balanced, like the levels, so I have to like increase and decrease it constantly. Oh, he did get hit by the cannonball that time. What happened?
I woke up in a dream, felt my heart beating faster.
Oh, God.
Was it more than it seemed,
Stretch my back out for a
or
second.
just another disaster? Mountain tops came crashing down, crashing down. Prison walls started fading out. I'm holding on to your memory, memory, till the day you come back to me. So take me out of this place. I'm just a heartbeat away. I feel you shining from the other side, under the darkest sky. Oh, why am I waiting?
was like the last, like, almost like a button of this one.
Why am I waiting you?
I don't know why. It just hurts me. So I'm just trying to.
Oh, why am I waiting you?
This is a shit one. It's not too bad, just it's a pain. Just gotta go all the way up. Passive Slayer exit. Why do you have this puzzle box up here, dude? Why do you have this shit? Excuse me. Oh. Awesome island. Thanks, opinion. Oh, I didn't do a farm run today. Oh, whatever. It's some other time, I guess. Over to the dig site. I wish the crystal bow was so much better. It's such a crap weapon. I wish it was stronger. I just feel like it could be. I don't like running after with my graceful on. That's the problem. I know it's like, there's no one here, but I've just heard so many stories of people running out. Oh, for this exact clue. Like, I don't know, I don't know what I'm doing. They run out for this exact clue, like thinking, oh, it's no big deal, whatever, right? And they get like fucking teleblock KO'd and shit. They can't enter. So, we'll just play it. I'm not even a risk. Got a ring of wealth on anything. It's about not that much.
It's a warning sign. Take your
Cool spot to go check to see people are doing clues here.
It's a warning sign. Steady hands start to quiver. 'Cause I wanna die when I feel alive. It's only just a warning. You hit me with a warning. I'm broken, but I'm learning.
Zemrock Road Top or Zemrock?
You hit me with a warning. It's only just a
BKR Mars.
warning. You hit me with a warning. It was only just a
Oh, that's the wrong tab. I was like, why does it look so weird?
It was only just a
Let's just put the room
It's a warning sign, but we're the ones left to suffer. It's a warning sign. These hands they shake because they're unsure, but I wanna die when I feel alive. It's only just a warning. You hit me with a warning shot. I'm broken, but I'm learning. It was only just a warning shot. It was only just a
Fuck off.
It was only just a It was only just a
Cool. Big, just a fucking cool, straight home arrows. How far is that from here? Just run to it? The shit is up there. An attack interrupted. Did I write this? I don't know. Where does that boat go to? It goes here, right? Yeah, it's not far. Justify it. This is where the like the blood altar. Whatever. Yeah, you're better off. The barrel submerge are just so good, or the burger bot teleport. Morton teleport. Just because, like, the Morton teleport gets you relatively close. Gets you to the town of Morton. Morton. Like, what weird fucking name in this game. I'm kinda curious what some of these challenge rules are. One pipe fills a barrel in water, while the other... One pipe fills a barrel in 1 hour, while another pipe fills the same barrel in 2 hours. How many will it take to fill the tank if both pipes are used? Totally didn't read. I'm sure I have to work on this one. Yes. That field. Oh, it's the scale. So this one is confusing. You have to go immediately west from where you teleport. Not where you would expect to. This way. Nice, like that white tile there. That's why it's a beta. The HD client. Or not the HD client, but the HD whatever, you know. Cool. Big. No, we got fuck all. Shit game. Shit game. Whatever. It took us 6 minutes to complete. Not too bad. probably should bring the super defense while I'm at it too, just to kind of prolong this. Let's watch something else, because this music is, it's okay, but I'd rather listen to something else. I kind of was curious in watching a couple things. This is a mathematics video. I like math. I know some people just hate math. I don't know why. I think it's just because you guys were traumatized as kids. That's why some people hate math. Math can actually be very interesting, and I think if you're really curious as to how to like find math interesting, one of the best channels I think that's around is either A Number File. Number File is probably the best. Again, you'd become motivated and interested in learning about math. Another really good channel was 3 Blue, 1 Brown. He tackles sometimes a little bit more complex topics, but I think he does it in still a somewhat approachable way with like a relatively limited amount of knowledge. But he's also done this like really awesome thing where it's called the Summer of Math Exposition 2. And essentially it's just they puts out a request for people aspiring video makers to just make a bunch of mathematics themed videos, and they pick which one's the best. And you see this like massive trend of like these very philosophical mathematical ones where they're like, what even is math, which is like a very interesting question. But
61,
I'm gonna
this
watch it.
paper divided the whole statistics community. Prior to that, a very influential statistician, Ronald Fisher, in 1961, this paper divided the whole statistics community. Prior to that, a very influential statistician, Ronald Fisher, popularized a theory called maximum likelihood estimation, which is regarded very, very highly. But this paper challenged their firm beliefs, so it was such a shock that the result is now known as Stein's paradox. Let's see what this is about. Suppose I have a set of data that follows a normal distribution with some unknown mean mu and a variance of 1.
Okay.
Now I randomly
standard.
pick a sample, a data point from this distribution, and let's say I picked 3.14. Your
Okay,
job
buddy.
is to
Think you're
estimate the
fucking
value
slick
of
picking pie.
mu. What would you estimate? On screen, it looks like it is slightly more than 3.14, but the point is that you don't know the value of mu. It could also be on the left of 3.14. The only thing you know for sure is that data point 3.14. So without much more information, you might just estimate mu to be 3.14. That's a sensible guess. After all, a normal distribution is clustered around its mean mu, so there is a good chance that the 3.14 picked is in the proximity of mu, and the error of your estimate would not be too big. In theory, that is the best estimator, in some sense of the word best. Now we play the same game, except this time we have 2 sets of data. They are completely unrelated to each other, but they both follow normal distribution with means mu1 and mu2, both variance 1.
Okay.
Again, I picked one data point from each of the distributions, and let's say they are 3.14 and 1.618. Now what would you estimate? By exactly the same logic, you might also estimate mu1 to be 3.14 and mu2 to be 1.618, and again, this is the best estimator in this situation.
Yeah, just a
But
guess.
things change if we have 3 independent sets of data. Exactly the same setup, normal distribution with unknown means and variance 1. Normally, if I have the data points x1, x2, and x3 respectively, then you would again estimate mu1 to be x1 and so on, just like the previous cases. But now this is not the best estimator anymore, because in 1961 we found a better one called the James Stein estimator. If the data points are x1, x2, and x3, then this is the James Stein estimator of the means. So in order to estimate mu1, it is better to multiply this factor in front rather than simply saying x1. This is really surprising. Those 3 sets of data are completely independent from each other, but in order to estimate mu1, it is better to incorporate all 3 data points.
So,
Because
wait. So he's arguing that if there's like an independent three independent distributions, completely unrelated to each other. It's better to then multiply as an estimator some weird factor, which we don't really understand why it's there, times the data points. That's fucking weird. That's a
The
strange idea.
prefactor depends on all of x1, x2, and x3. This surprising result is now known as Stein's paradox. But this is not the only surprise here. James Stein estimator generalizes to p sets of data, where p is at least 3. And very similarly, the estimate is going to have this factor in front. So our ordinary estimate, which is just echoing back the data points x1 up to xp, was the best in 1 and 2 dimensions, but is overpowered by the James Stein estimator in 3 dimensions and above. What happened there? What's more, that really trusted theory of maximum likelihood estimation also supports our intuition. The theory also tells us to just use the data points given, the ordinary estimator. So the fact that the James Stein estimator beats a well-studied theory definitely caused chaos in the statistics community. But what do I really mean by an estimator being the best?
I don't know, you fucking tell me, buddy.
To quantify
That's your
how
video.
good an estimator is, we use the mean squared error. Error is the difference between our estimator mu hat and the true but unknown mean mu. And then we square it to make it positive. In the case of multiple sets of data, we treat those estimators and means as vectors and consider the norm of it squared. In other words, we just consider the squared error in each component, then add them all up. Finally, we take the average. This is taken into account for the randomness in the estimator. To be clear, if we see a certain sample X, it already determines our estimate mu hat. You can't introduce your own bias here. So this process is entirely deterministic, not random, but the samples taken are random because they are taken from a distribution. So the expected value here takes all possible values of the sample into account. In other words, this is how much, on average, the estimator deviates from the true value. For example, in the one-dimensional case, what is the mean squared error of the ordinary estimator? The estimator is exactly the sample taken, so if we have the sample being x, then the estimator will be x. In this case, the mean squared error turns out to be the formula for the variance of x. We have assumed that the normal distribution has variance 1, so the mean squared error is 1 in this case. But the error in general depends on mu, the true mean. To illustrate this, let's take a naive estimator 7. Whatever sample I have taken, you are just going to estimate the mean to be 7 anyway. The mean squared error is then the expected value of 7 minus mu whole squared. However, the square inside does not depend on the sample x, and so it is not a random quantity. Therefore, the expected value is just what's inside, 7 minus mu whole squared. This clearly depends on the true mean mu. We can then plot the mean squared error of these two estimators against the true mean mu. The ordinary estimator returns a constant 1, independent of mu, and the naive guess 7 is a parabola, centered around mu equals 7. In this case, we can't say definitively which estimator is better, because if the true mean is actually close to 7...
Okay, I got bored of this video. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm not at all interested in this. I thought I was gonna be interested. It's not very good. Alright, what else do you have to do here? Isleworth Camp. Store. Should be okay. This I am interested in though. Very probably one of my favorite YouTubers of all time, Sisyphus55. The guy is nuts at how good of a video maker he is. Just very entertaining stuff overall. It's more like theoretical stuff, but or not theoretical, but like he deals with like what's it called? I don't know how to describe it. He deals with like philosophy and psychology and stuff like that. This is gonna suck.
When I was younger, I never felt like I was enough. There was a void within me, and with it, the desire to have it fulfilled. According to psychoanalysis, this is actually pretty normal. Lacan wrote of the difference between desire and need. Whereas a need is a biological drive, I need to drink when I'm thirsty, for example, and has a specific point of satisfaction, desire is more tricky. Desire emerges from a lack. Not the lack of a certain thing, but lack itself. Not the lack of a certain thing, but lack emerges. Lacan wrote of the difference between desire and need. Whereas a need is a biological drive, I need to drink when I'm thirsty.
This is gonna suck.
To feel oneself as lacking, no matter what. For Lacan, we will always be dissatisfied, but this doesn't stop us from believing certain people, objects, or even identities will finally satisfy us. Still, they don't. We are only ever momentarily satisfied. This dissatisfaction is called phallic jouissance, and it sucks. It reminds us that we exist for no particular reason except after a short period of struggle to die. We are left once again asking ourselves, who even are we? That's what I asked at such a young age, as do many, and I was told by myself and others to be a man. I enjoyed sports, I liked girls, I liked dinosaurs, and the color blue. So I thought, why not just be the best man I can be? That will surely satisfy this existential dread. And I set about doing just that, working out, obsessing over girls, learning not to cry. I internalized the message that men are successful and powerful, and each time I found success and power, I received positive feedback from those around me. Each action towards becoming a man left me feeling a little bit less empty. Despite the instability of my world, I could at least rely on the stable ideal of masculinity. But flash forward a few years to 2 years of depression, a destructive lust addiction, and thousands of dollars in therapy, and I can tell you that this pursuit of the masculine ideal is, at least for me, a dead end. Quite literally, phallic jouissance.
Interesting.
The echo sounder indicates the most favorable spot to drop anchor.
This isn't unique. The majority of people subconsciously rely on their gender identity as the blueprint for their lives. The ontological security it provides is strangely satisfying. And so we see online communities such as the Manosphere, a movement that attempts to reclaim the perceived power and control that has been lost in the crisis of masculinity. Men are taught to stick to rigid norms of masculinity, which is justified through
this is an interesting thing. So, a lot of people like to think that Andrew Tate and Dan Bilzerian, this Red Pill shit, is like new. It isn't. It isn't that new at all. And maybe I'm starting to be. This is where I'm going to start becoming like a boomer, because like I'm now starting to be like the parents that I used to have who looked at technology, and I was like, no, it's different this time. It isn't. Yeah, it's a different flavor. Sure, there's slight differences, but the general feeling is the same. It's the idea that you're able to recapture something in a world where these gender norms are starting to break down, and trying to be able to, like, feeling dissatisfied with yourself as an attempt to kind of figure out why you're dissatisfied with yourself or the world. You try to cling towards these old ideals that seem to work pretty well back in the day. Like this idea of like trying to embrace masculinity to an extreme degree as a way to maybe compensate for that lacking of feeling within yourself, that lack within yourself. And the point of what and so that's the idea. And this manosphere stuff is the exact same as what happened with, now I have this heraldic shield, cool. Pog. Anyways, yeah, but it's all a reprieve. It's all just a short temporary escape into something that isn't really genuinely you. You know, you're clinging to an aesthetic, to an ideal, hoping that somehow that's going to give you some sense of meaning within your life. It might for some people. I just highly doubt that people are specific enough or are that boring, I guess to say, that literally something will work for everybody. I just don't think that's the case. I just think people are too varied to have that. That's my genuine opinion. I think people are too varied and complex to allow one singular system to be able to work so well for all of them. I just don't think it works. I am not convinced that it would work for people. People have too different of a past and too different of experiences in life for that to be the case, in my opinion. But what do I know? And then layering. Ash Sanctifier. Then we need potion.
To evolutionary biology and psychology. Men are this, and not men are that. And if you follow along, you too can be an alpha with access to an infinite number of partners, vast wealth, and high self-esteem. Pretty easy, right? But should we rely on gender identity as a source of existential security to begin with? It sure should be if that's where I'm going to rest my identity. Today's video is sponsored by Endel. One of my favorite psychological concepts is the idea of flow, in which you are fully engaged in an activity to the point where you lose track of time. Studied by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the flow state is incredibly beneficial for creative work. Since my job is primarily toying with ideas and how to visualize them, it would make sense to want to find that flow. But just getting into a flow state isn't all that easy. Or so I thought until I found Endel, an app that perfectly gets me locked in.
Yeah, okay.
I usually use Endel while I'm working. But how does this app work exactly? Endel reacts to inputs like time of the day, weather, heart rate, and location in order to create a custom soundscape for whatever you're trying to do. Endel helps you boost productivity by helping you concentrate for longer periods of time, relax you through calming your mind to create feelings of comfort, and, most importantly for me, sleep by soothing you into a deep state of rest. If you're in need of some mental clarity in order to improve productivity, then head on over to the link in the description and download Endel today. The first 100 people to download Endel will get a free week of audio experiences. Gender essentialists rely on the conceptualization of gender as requiring both necessary and sufficient conditions. However, whether you accept them or not, there exists plenty of conditional exceptions to the binary of femininity and masculinity. The existence of trans people, masculine women, and feminine men problematize the promised stability of gender norms. As Mercotte notes, the very existence of trans people is a reminder that gender, and therefore gender hierarchy, is a social construct, and therefore can be analyzed, criticized, and even changed.
That's a very, this is convincing to someone who already believes that transness is like a legitimate thing, but there are people that don't believe transness is even legitimate, so this argument isn't very convincing to those individuals. Because some people just believe that trans people aren't really those individuals. They think that they are They don't think, like, if a trans, like, for instance, like a trans woman, they don't believe a trans woman actually is a woman. They just think it's a man dressing up, essentially. That's all they think that it is. So you have to be. It's not a very consistent. I would. This is not a very convincing argument. Like, it works for me. Like, sure, I think that's a good point, but like, it's not for everybody. Not everyone's gonna believe it. And he's primarily, I imagine, trying to. This Wittgenstein. He's trying to argue that to people, I imagine, who really into this manosphere stuff, but.
Could instead be conceived under Wittgenstein's notion of family resemblance, where gender identities are loosely conceptualized under a series of overlapping similarities rather than one common feature. Yes, a cat is four-legged and hairy, but some cats are three-legged, and some cats are hairless, and a dog could be considered a cat under these conditions. Suddenly, the stumped responses over the question, "What is a woman?" should make slightly more sense. Concepts under Wittgenstein are limited guidelines for understanding the world. This gets taken to the performative level when we look at the simultaneously celebratory and repulsed social reaction towards drag queens. As Judith Butler explains, drag queens represent a pastiche on gender. Drag is a double inversion that says appearance is an illusion. My outside appearance is feminine, but my essence is masculine. My appearance outside is masculine, but my essence inside is feminine. Drag reveals the imitative structure of gender and its unstable contingency. It confirms the anguish for those rigidly attached to the binary, that there is no true original to be imitated, but rather overlapping similarities orbiting around nothingness. But how could gender be a social construct if trans people are so compelled to one gender or another? Likewise, why did I so strongly feel the need to be a man to begin with? Did I even really have a choice? One useful way to look at this is through Julia Serrano's intrinsic inclination model. Serrano, a trans woman and biologist, uses her subjective experience in transitioning as well as her knowledge of human biology to develop a model that explains human gender and sexual variation, where most fit into a binary and a smaller group appears to vary outside of it. Basically, subconscious sex, sexuality, and gender are distinct concepts that are determined independently from one another. Sexuality represents the physical sex element, which in itself can be broken down into multiple independent categories, such as genetic sex, gonadal sex, hormonal sex, and so on. Subconscious sex represents the sense of one's own sex that may or may not match their overall physical sex. This helps explain the deep ontological drive we have to identify as one sex or another. But what's the evidence for subconscious sex? Some research suggests that transgender transition is maintained in youth even after 5 years. The high rate of transitions maintained in one Samoan tribe that is highly supportive of atypical gender expression suggests that one key variable is social acceptance. Another example of subconscious sex is the numerous case studies of boys who suffered botched circumcisions and are brought up as girls. Despite this, they tend to assert that they are boys. Serrano's model blends both essentialist and constructivist views on sexuality to basically say, in its natural state, these inclinations roughly correlate with physical sex, thus the bimodal distribution. However, there is also a great deal of variation in gender and sexuality. Overall, the impulse to satisfy our inclination to identify as one gender or another appears to be a strong and subconscious pull that is informed by both biology and society.
So essentially, the argument they were making was the argument that he was making essentially was something along the lines. It seems like it's gonna sound stupid. I wasn't really paying that much attention. It's just hard to sometimes articulate exactly everything he talked about without. And I sometimes I've watched his videos a couple times to kind of get like, okay, what exactly was he talking about? But it's something along the lines of like, essentially. What were all the points he brought up? Now I feel so stupid. I can't articulate them again. Transgender people pose a problem to the idea that masculinity or femininity is a strictly defined binary concept. Strictly defined concept to begin with, as in like there is only men or women. It's like, well, there's a lot of reasons to believe that it's actually much more complicated than that. So the idea that you should even adhere, so I think he's probably going to go to the idea that even, I think his goal is to kind of, his point was going to be that what masculinity and femininity is very loosely defined anyways, and so an attempt to try to like rigidly adhere to one and insisting that your definition is accurate is just kind of a waste of time. It's not really true. So it is the case that just masculinity and femininity are just very complex and varied. So
But wait a minute. If there is any worth in pursuing my lifelong goal of becoming the best man I can be, then masculinity better be a source of stability. The whole point is that I feel deeply uncertain about who I am. I don't want to bet on the wrong horse. And now you're telling me that gender is both rigid and fluid? Serrano's model does a great job in integrating what the anthropologist Mary Douglas calls anomalies, instances which challenge our cultural classifications. How each culture tends to process these anomalies is called pollution behavior, whereby an anomaly can either be rejected or integrated. Importantly, Slavoj Žižek in his The Sexual is Political notes a cultural divergence in how we treat the anomalous nature of non-binary cases. For some, the solution is to pursue a post-gender world. However, there is an absence of clarity for this future world. Would it be a world of sexlessness or a libidinal overspilling of sexuality? Žižek asks whether sexuality is the object or obstacle of such an approach. And the infinite overcategorizing of gender identities, a potential third middle ground solution, is dismissed by Žižek as a neoliberal impulse to classify and make anthropologist Mary Douglas calls anomalies, instances which challenge our cultural classifications. How each culture tends to process these anomalies is called pollution behavior, whereby an anomaly can either be rejected or integrated. Importantly, Slavoj Žižek in his The Sexual is Political notes a cultural divergence in how we treat the anomalous nature of non-binary cases. For some, the solution is to pursue a post-gender world. However, there is an absence of clarity for this future world. Would it be a world of sexlessness or a libidinal overspilling of sexuality? Žižek asks whether sexuality is the object or obstacle of such anomalies. Some, the solution diversity better be a source of rigid and fluid. Our cultural classifications. How each culture tends to process these anomalies is called pollution behavior, whereby an anomaly can either be rejected or integrated. Importantly, Slavoj Žižek in his The Sexual is Political notes a cultural divergence in how we treat the anomalous nature of non-binary cases. For some, the solution is to pursue a post-gender world. However, there is an absence of clarity for this future world. Would it be a world of sexlessness or a libidinal overspilling of sexuality? Žižek asks whether sexuality is the object or obstacle of such an approach. And the infinite overcategorizing of gender identities, a potential third middle ground solution, is dismissed by Žižek as a neoliberal impulse to classify and make use of specific identities. Another approach, taken in more right-wing circles, is to double down on gender roles and reject, in sometimes violent manners, anomalous instances of gender expression. Basically, being a man is awesome, and these non-binary instances are mistaken at best, or at worst, conspiring against masculinity itself. Such essentialist rejection is ironically grounded in Beauvoir's observation of women as the secondary sex. For Beauvoir, there is no true definition of man. They can be anything. To be feminine, however, is to strictly adhere to a certain list of things. Here we have the conclusion of the definition of a man. They can be anything as long as they are not the things that women must be. This is, however, an ideal, as a man can never truly be unfeminine enough. Because this ideal of non-femaleness is unattainable, many manosphere advocates engage in comically rigid definitions of masculinity, asserting that a real man doesn't eat sushi and only drinks sparkling water. For a movement overtly concerned with rejected definitions of every sex, for Beauvoir, there is no true definition.
I'm trying to
of
do too
man.
much at once.
They can be
I'm trying to text
any-
somebody. I'm trying to play this game. I'm trying to fucking also do this. It's just, ugh, whatever. I need a second. Autocorrect sucks. Jesus Christ. It's so bad. I'll do this at the end. I've done already a lot of these. I don't really want to do. Okay, back to the video.
To be feminine, however, is to strictly adhere to a certain list of things. Here we have the conclusion of the definition of a man. They can be anything as long as they are not the things that women must be. This is, however, an ideal, as a man can never truly be unfeminine enough. Because this ideal of non-femaleness is unattainable, many manosphere advocates engage in comically rigid definitions of masculinity, asserting that a real man doesn't eat sushi and only drinks sparkling water. For a movement overtly concerned with rejecting gender as a social construct, these men have simultaneously doubled down on the socially constructive assertion that one must become a man and is not just born as such. They must prove that they are men beyond simply dropping their pants. When we look at the fact that the default mode of a fertilized egg is a chromosomal female, the logic for this unrealistic expectation becomes hilariously clear. As Edwin Gale notes, even early on, masculinity is aptly described as a prolonged, uneasy, and risky venture, a kind of struggle against inherent trends towards femaleness. He goes on to note that women could also easily maintain the species with a well-equipped sperm bank. Men suddenly seem like an afterthought of biology, simply existing to shuffle the genes around rather than acting as this powerful orderer of human society. Depicted comically in movies such as The Love Witch, we can see this emphasis on domination and conquest that defines masculinity as perhaps a byproduct of a fundamental insecurity that men risk being useless. Rigid essentialism can also be seen as a response to a larger form of aforementioned classification. Despite the celebrated fluidity of identity, particular ethnic and gender identities are simultaneously encouraged to assert and celebrate their distinct roots. Compared to these marginalized groups, the association of straight white men as majority shareholders in gendered and racial violence has led to a perceived prohibition in feeling proud to be, well, a white dude. Ironically, as Zizek notes, this has placed straight white men in a universal neutral medium position. The association of straight white men as majority shareholders in gendered and racial as perhaps a
I gotta watch
byproduct
this
of a
video again.
fundamental
It's too
insecurity
complex. I'm not really paying much
that
attention
men
to it.
risk being useless. Rigid essentialism can also be seen as a response to a larger form of aforementioned classification. Despite the celebrated fluidity of identity, particular ethnic and gender identities are simultaneously encouraged to assert and celebrate their distinct roots. Compared to these marginalized groups, the association of straight white men as majority shareholders in gendered and racial violence has led to a perceived prohibition in feeling proud to be, well, a white dude. Ironically, as Zizek notes, this has placed straight white men in a universal neutral medium position, where they are still nonetheless centered. Additionally, it has allowed for many men to justify hateful views and behaviors on the basis that there is a crisis of masculinity. Why can't I, a man, be proud of my identity? This becomes especially pertinent if I'm not receiving what are called patriarchal dividends, the rewards I expect to receive as a straight man. What if I have little success with women and resonate deeply with The Catcher in the Rye? What if I was born into relative poverty? What if I was abused at an early age and inherited debilitating mental illness? The train of thought is as such. I'm told that I can't celebrate my identity because I benefit from the oppression of others, and yet I see no benefits for myself. Suddenly, my grievance, which some may call entitlement, becomes political. If I'm a young man, feeling incomplete, and somebody tells me that my gender identity, my source of ontological security, is fundamentally oppressive and antagonistic to the world, I would feel dehumanized. I may become depressed and see the world as hopeless. Maybe it is fundamentally wrong to be a man. But then, when I come across a very stable genius professor from Toronto crying about how young men are rejected and seen as evil, I suddenly feel understood. I'm seen as human. I should clean my room, and it's not my fault. It's the woke moralists.
Based. I love it because of the lobsters.
The manosphere appears to be one of the few spaces where men feel uniquely humanized. You can go through the hundreds of commenters under my Peterson video explaining how he made them feel heard and understood, and maybe even helped them. If I want to be a great man and I'm discouraged from doing so, and I'm coming up short, here are some guys that will tell me to get my life in order. No matter who you are, it does feel nice to go somewhere where your identity is celebrated and encouraged by others that look like you. What's wrong with that impulse? To feel understood, to feel human. However, the manosphere could also be seen as a solid example of the cycle of dehumanization, a well-studied psychological phenomenon. Dehumanization occurs when in-group members feel threatened by outgroups, and as a result, assign fewer human traits to outgroup members. This is perpetuated through the cycle of dehumanization, in which in-group members are threatened by the dehumanization of outgroup members, and consequently dehumanize the outgroup. The particular event of dehumanization is the notable crisis of masculinity. Many men feel like their masculinity is unwelcome or downright rejected. They may feel like their own personal issues are unheard. They may feel dehumanized. And so such men will dehumanize the outgroup, seeing women, gay people, and liberals as less human. Here we see the emergence of red pill communities, where young men are taught about hypergamy and how dating is really just laissez-faire capitalism. The manosphere has been conceptualized by O'Neill as an extension and acceleration of existing cultural norms, in that it uses neoliberal economic theory and scientific rationality to construct a seduction ideology. Namely, the manosphere functions closely with neoliberal economics, through commodifying women and sex. This is exemplified by the relative absence of discussing the quality of sex and the hyper-concern with maximizing the quantity of sex. Where sexuality becomes overdetermined by market logics, it produces a kind of circumscribed libidinousness that is entirely generic in its aims and ambitions. There is an emptying out of the subjective and the interpersonal, as a capitalist logic of value comes to undermine and obscure a more expansive appreciation of human values. Under this logic, sex becomes pretty empty, used more for validating one's masculinity through conquest and domination than forming real connections. And when such capitalist logic fails, women and other marginalized groups are used as scapegoats. Women have an especially precarious position within this ideology, as when compared to the marginalized groups that are merely seen as obstacles, women possess the validation that masculinity craves. Women, nefarious gatekeepers to status and sex, become nothing more than fembots that can be programmed to a man's liking. They are seen as simultaneously weak and incredibly powerful, a common sentiment for scapegoats in most shaky ideologies. And so the source of humanization for men who feel lost simultaneously equips them with a worldview that confirms the lack of humanity in the perceived outgroup, as well as tools to use them for their own self-validation. Importantly, research has suggested that the cycle can be broken through meta-humanization, in which the in-group is seen by the out-group as human, leading to a decrease in dehumanizing the out-group. But meta-humanization is going to be tricky. How are marginalized groups, the outgroups, that are legitimately impacted by systemic oppression, often at the helm of straight white guys, expected to step up and humanize them when such a group has very actively perpetuated dehumanization against them? Here, it should be noted that meta-humanization is not a process of acceptance, but rather one of understanding. To be heard is sometimes all that it takes. This is well represented by Daryl Davis, a black man who has converted over 200 KKK members to give up their racist views through friendship. Rather than dismissing them as simply hateful, he studies the mechanisms behind the hate, and then he would meet with them, human to human, and attempt to find similarities between himself and them. In other words, humanize them. Note that he never accepts their hateful beliefs. However, the fact that he attempts to understand them means that he saw these KKK members as worthy of being understood, a deeply humanizing act.
Cousteau leads a team of divers toward a group of ships with gaping wounds, marooned on the edge of a reef.
To help us, let's return to the categorization of identities. A useful term for such categorization could be also intersectionality, in which one individual can belong to differing categories of gender, sexuality, race, and so on, and can end up facing particularly unique outcomes when faced with oppression. As noted by FD Signifier, intersectionality has been rarely applied to straight white men. This makes sense, as under this theory, they tend to benefit from a protective barrier in terms of their gender, race, and sexuality. It also feels like a waste of time. Most of the people under this category aren't going to listen because it would require an entire reframing of their worldview. However, as FD notes, viewing such a hegemonic group through an intersectional lens is necessary. There are differences in terms of physical attractiveness, material wealth, and mental health within such a group that can determine their place in society. And more often than not, those young white men who are unattractive, poor, and suffer from trauma are offered little in the way of healthy spaces to develop the tools to grow. Unlike marginalized individuals who, when they come up short in life, can accurately point to certain systems and institutions that have oppressed them, lost and broken guys are implicitly told and explicitly told through the manosphere that the world should work in their favor, and that what is oppressing them are the marginalized groups who are actively working to make these systems more equitable. The lack of healthy spaces for such men of lower status breeds a cycle of racism, misogyny, assault, and even spree shooting. These boys are angry. And so to apply a level of meta-humanization to them is to figure out why they are so angry, a task that FD Signifier does with considerable courage and patience. Firstly, I would highly encourage everyone to watch FD's 3-part video series on the manosphere. My omission of the black manosphere and the theme of race is extensively covered in his videos. So what is his analysis of heteromasculine identity? FD's analysis centers on the edgelord, an individual who associates with social rejection through deliberate shock and provocation. Think the Joker or the Riddler. These individuals, sensing a lack of control over their situation, claim their social rejection as deliberate and within their control. In a philosophical sense, the edgelord believes that they can see the ultimate truth of the world and will now reflect this horrid truth of violence and filth back to the world. Under Nietzschean terms, these are practitioners of passive nihilism, who resign to the misery of life and find a great deal of joy in laughing at those who still think their lives are meaningful. At their worst, they become cataclysmic nihilists, who see humanity as deserving of punishment. This passive nihilism can be juxtaposed with active nihilism. One example is Batman, who sees the horror of existence and still heroically chooses to order his own reality. They create new values and become who they truly are. What I find interesting about FD's analysis is when he points out that Batman could just as easily be the Joker if he wasn't so handsome, wealthy, and relatively free of mental illness. The Riddler points this out to Batman, that the two are alike in that they see themselves as above the values of society. They are both edgy. However, the Riddler has spent his life in poverty, is considerably unattractive, and, well, is a loser in terms of masculinity. Batman can be an active nihilist because he has less barriers to deal with. He's the ideal of hegemonic masculinity. It's a lot easier to fight against the darkness of the world when every woman swoons over you and you're a billionaire. The manosphere drifts between active and passive nihilism. It offers advice for men to become who they are by going to the gym, dressing better, and learning to talk to women. And when they come up short, the manosphere offers an explanation, telling men that the world is a dark place for those who dare to be masculine and that they deserve power and influence. This is what motivates passive nihilism, the idea that the world is to blame for you being a loser. As Conaway writes, masculinity is not the experience of power, but the experience of entitlement to power. If I was to hedge my identity on masculinity, then power would be of primary importance. And if I felt like my power was compromised in some way, that I wasn't manly, then I would go out of my way to compensate. This is the idea behind symbolic self-completion theory, where we seek out alternative channels to affirm our identity when certain core parts of our identity are threatened. For example, if I did poorly in school and thought of myself as a good student, I would study extra hard, or maybe I would annoyingly correct inaccuracies. Now let's say I see myself as manly. I go to the gym, I have a cool car, but then I go on Instagram and I see someone who is absolutely ripped and drives a Bugatti. Once again, a very integral part of my identity is threatened. But how do I even compensate? The avenues to feel bad about my masculinity are infinite. This is Conaway's main topic of research, the relative deprivation of masculinities. Relative deprivation is a concept typically used in political science to describe why some groups tend to revolt against institutions. It typically occurs when they are relatively deprived, when they are aware that they are being denied something they feel entitled to and recognize a discrepancy between their expectations and capabilities. Here, expectations can mean images and ideals of masculinity, and capabilities can mean one's ability to realize such ideals. Conaway notes 3 types of relative deprivation of masculinities. Decremental relative deprivation is the loss of what one once had or thought they could have. Men experience the sense that their capabilities are on the decline, by way, for example, of being unable to provide for their family. One example is male factory workers in the US who have ended up unemployed. Conaway notes that they tend to reject participation in the new economy of either service sector jobs, or they refuse to seek welfare benefits. Both of these options are seen as feminized social positions. This tends to lead to unsettled lives. If they maintain employment, men may be threatened by the presence of non-men in the factory. This is popularly covered under Kimmel's concept of aggrieved entitlement, a perception that the benefits and/or status you believe yourself entitled to have been wrongfully taken away from you by unforeseen forces. Another form of deprivation is by way of aspirational deprivation, as reflected in my examples of scrolling through Instagram and seeing a Bugatti. Aspirational deprivation occurs when there is an increase in idealized discourses of masculinity, without a rise in the ability for men to realize these ideals. Men are expected to be alphas, by way of having lots of money and access to many sexual partners. The relative ease of access to adult entertainment that reminds men of the physical intimacy that they are missing out on, paired with the rampant luxury influencer lifestyle that is promoted everywhere, makes this sense of deprivation constant.
I really want to do
We have a
AVNCs.
surplus
No,
of
not
images
really.
to remind us of the fact that we are lonely,
Slow task.
poor, and ugly. Finally, antithetical deprivation reflects the instability in how non-masculine groups view masculinity. It is a decrease in the ability to reach masculine images promoted by outer groups. One such example is the ick trend perpetuated by women on TikTok, who increasingly narrow down definitions of what men do they find unattractive. As many men place their entire sense of self-worth on female validation, such a trend of unrealistic expectations simply encourages pessimism and low self-esteem. Overall, Conaway notes that men feel like their entitlement to certain things is threatened, that expectations are becoming more extreme, and that their capabilities are declining. Research suggests that men become less empathetic, more angry, and overall more emotional when they sense a gender threat. However, since masculinity typically rests on social and economic means, such as wealth, physical ability, and attractiveness, shouldn't we be able to affirm our masculinity through achieving some level of success in these avenues? And yet, as noted by FD, the intersectionality of straight white men places many of these entitled expectancies far out of reach. Men persuaded into being the gears of late capitalism are promised that they will also be the beneficiaries. Hustle culture is all the rage. However, wealth inequality reveals blind industriousness as a dead end for most. Even if the straight male identity is closer to benefiting from such a system, many men are still denied the social and economic means to affirm their masculinity due to systemic inequality. Frustration is the result. If capitalism tells me that I must accumulate as much as I can, and patriarchy tells me that I'm the one who's primarily responsible for it, it's going to result in the development of significant insecurity and anxiety issues. For many men, deprivation of their masculinity leads to an inability to construct a sense of self that autonomously orients them. Their source of ontological security, masculinity, has been denied, deprived, and denigrated. This may lead to shifts in political attitudes. One study demonstrates that men are more likely to shift socio-political attitudes after a romantic rejection. This could be due to the fact that attractiveness for men is assumed to be more closely tied to socioeconomic status than physical attraction. Blaming a system for being unable to offer them the status that will lead to romantic success is easier than, well, getting over yourself. Instead, rejected men may become especially sensitive to the noticeably right-wing anxiety over the male ego, leading to a double down on gender rigidity. Then there are the edgelords. These cynical individuals may present themselves as operating freely by rebelling against any and all rules. However, as noted by research on autonomy, such behavior is far from free, as it is still perfectly correlated with the command, just negatively correlated. The boy who says yes to cleaning his room and the other boy who says no to cleaning his room solely because the order is coming from their parents are both not acting freely. Their choice is tied to the source of the command. But the boy who, when asked to clean their room, uses critical thinking and reflects on whether their room actually needs to be cleaned, is acting freely. We see that there is little difference between mindless obedience and disobedience. Unfortunately, others may use an even easier and more destructive pillar of masculinity to affirm themselves, mainly violence and aggression. What cannot be met through economic and social means, such as wealth, athletic ability, physical attractiveness, can be met through physical and sexual violence to gain power, i.e., alternative forms of performing dominant depictions of masculinity. Men who are unable to battle the nihilism that emerges through their sense of deprivation may turn towards hateful rhetoric, social aggression, or even violence in order to regain power. The string theory of murder posits that violent perpetrators are rarely psychotic loners or inhuman monsters. Rather, they tend to be individuals who suffer chronic stress due to long-term frustration and a lack of pro-social support. Acute strain follows, which leads to the planning stage that involves fantasies to regain control of the situation through a masculine solution which is then actualized. This Hail Mary effort, although appearing as a heroic and brave act against a world that lied to them, is unfortunately nothing more than a solipsistic manifestation of masculinity at its very worst. Hegemonic masculinity hedges on power and control. It requires a man to be financially, socially, and sexually dominant. And, as one paper notes, many spree shooters tend to cite the very inability to live up to such roles, as well as the social punishment that comes as a result, as primary justifications for their violence. Here we have the toxic combination of inadequate emotional support, unequal wealth distribution, and the promise of salvation through a masculinity built on hierarchy. Masculinity, in order to have value, requires things that are not masculine to have less value. What is not masculine, of course, is flexible. Women, trans people, gay people, black people, the vaccinated, socialists. This is the crux of a gender identity rested on power and domination. It only works if the things that are not it are worse off. And it explains the aggressive reactions when those who strive to be masculine feel unable to live up to such standards of conquest. It means that they have no value. The question that I wish I had asked my younger self is this: should you be pursuing an ideal that requires the devaluing of others? Many of the videos I've posted over the last few months grappled with this personal question. I pursued an identity that promised salvation, relinquishment from that Lacanian discontent, and I pursued a more actively nihilistic approach, largely due to my own status. If I was less attractive or had less money or had inherited a certain collection of traumas, who is to say where I would have landed? Maybe I would be an edgelord. Instead, I got in shape, I had slept around, and I began to make some money. I built a life pursuing my own values, deciding to take my time going to university, and pursuing a fulfilling career. And yet, I cannot say that any of this led to enlightenment. I became overly occupied with finances, sometimes pursuing money at the expense of creativity and my own sanity. I drank heavily, thinking that my Hemingway-esque tolerance was admirable and doing an innumerable amount of dumb things drunk. I developed an implicitly dehumanizing view of women, using casual relationships to reaffirm my own masculinity and habitually objectifying others as a result. Lust became an addiction, the sole motivational force in my life, because it reaffirmed my identity as a man, and soon sex and shame intertwined, resulting in my own struggle to develop healthy romantic relationships. I became significantly depressed and suffered a severe identity crisis. I became a servant to this masculine ideal. Like Batman, yes, I get to compare myself to Batman because this is my channel, the mission, the object of my desire stunted my growth. Batman could easily use his vast wealth to make a great deal of systemic change and lower crime rates, and yet he chooses to dress like a bat and fight people who suffer mental health issues. As FD notes, Batman struggles to hold on to any healthy relationships. He doesn't seem all that happy either, and Gotham never really seems to improve despite his crusade of justice. Nonetheless, the idea of Batman for Bruce Wayne, of a masked ideal that is greater than man, is alluring on a psychological level. We want to celebrate the symbol of Batman as a source of stability and order within the chaos. I too saw such an ideal reflected in many masculine role models: Roosevelt, Camus, Hemingway. These pillars of masculinity offered static solutions to my own inadequacies of loneliness, incompetence, and purposelessness. They supplemented a character I could hide behind.